And so at 24, um, aware that actually this was only going to compound over time, this wasn't going to become easier. I did the unthinkable. I crossed the street one night, shaved my head at the neighbour's house, bought a combi van, which is, a camper van on wheels, gave the keys of my practice to a Kiwi who had flown over for a job, sight unseen, gave him 12 pages of policies and procedures and wished him all the best. And I threw my wife in the boot and we took off around Australia. And it was the genius in the madness was I was running away and I could blame somebody else for what was going to be an inevitable business failure because I was on holidays when this was all going to come crashing down.
In today's show, I am delighted to introduce you to the wonderful Jason T. Smith. Jason is a physiotherapist who never planned to be an entrepreneur but ended up building Australia's largest physiotherapy network, the Back in Motion Health Group, with 140 locations, over 700 practitioners and more than 1 million loyal clients, which he subsequently sold for over $100 million. Jason's story started in a converted carport and was told by the industry that franchising healthcare was impossible. He called himself an accidental founder who got things more wrong than he ever got right. He's since mentored over 10,000 leaders through the Iceberg Leadership Institute and is the author of 3 books, including Unlikely. Today, we're going deep into the practical realities of scaling a business, including what actually works, what nearly broke him, and what SME leaders can learn from Jason's incredible journey. As ever, I invite you to go and grab a cup of coffee, a notepad and pen, and enjoy the show. Jason, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Brendan. Great to be with a fellow crazy man entrepreneur.
Yeah.
A scaling man.
Yes, I have gone down the rabbit hole of your story over recent weeks, and I'm hugely excited to share this with our listeners today.
Wow.
We're very aligned. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Jason, to kick off the show, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Well, mate, if you have gone down the rabbit holes, then you're going to need therapy, my friend. Scaling with purpose, it's a great thematic because it means different things, I'm sure, to all of your listeners. Scaling is probably the easy bit. Scaling to me just is the growth. It's the leveraging. I'd call it the mathematics of your idea, how you get multiplication, how you strive for impact. So I think the scaling is the easier part of that phrase. The purpose bit is cryptic because that's open to interpretation. Purpose is the meaningfulness. It's the why. It's what turns your success of scaling into significance. It's trying to connect your purpose, your life calling, in fact, I like the word conviction, Brendan. Conviction is a better way for me to articulate, I think, what I feel compelled by. So purpose and vision are these ideas of what could be, whereas I feel like conviction is something that should be. You are compelled. I almost have no choice. I am a character in the story, and it's been pre-written, and I'm trying to discover how I make my best contribution to the world.
I love that. Absolutely love that. I knew we were very aligned. We're going to dive deep into what compelled you to go on this crazy scaling journey, because just to set the frame for our listeners, you will all have been, no doubt, to a physio at some point in time. And I suspect when you visited that physio, at no point did you kind of look around the business, the little room and the bed and think, wow, this lends itself to really scaling. like one of my best friends, and he is a world-class physio, is Sean. And what makes Sean a great physio is Sean. What impedes Sean in the context of him ever scaling his business is Sean. So let's go back because you describe yourself as an accidental entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You started treating friends and family as a qualified physio from your carport. So do you get this visual, everyone? So at what point did you think you could grow and eventually scale this business? What
Yeah.
seeded the confidence? Take us back to that moment.
Well, I try and dress up my story to sound better than it is. I call it a garage, but the truth is, you're right. It's a carport. There were no brick walls. We had to clad this open framework and put secondhand carpet down to make it look like a presentable room. It was a humble, humble beginning, Brendan. And I guess the fortunate thing was at the time I had no intention of world domination. It was really just a side hustle. It was a bit of pocket money to try and just make the mortgage repayments because I was expecting to work overseas in the developing world. So that's why I describe myself as a very accidental entrepreneur. It was many years into what I call this great adventure before I caught a picture of what it could become if I was to scale it. So not only was I an accidental entrepreneur, I was a very reluctant participator in the growth story because it was many years into it before I realized what I actually held in my hands. It was my own discovery. I was probably the last to discover the potential compared to the friends and the family and the patients around me who would speak to the potential before I could even see it.
But I mean, you took this company, this entity that you created back in motion from the carport to, if my research is right, 140 locations, became the largest practice across Australia and New Zealand, and you eventually sold it for $100 million. I mean, this is every entrepreneur's dream, but not in a million years would you ever think that the the physio practice lends itself to becoming a
Yeah,
scalable business model. So
yeah,
take us back to that point where you realize that actually this could be bigger than what it is. Were you still operating out of the carport at this stage? Had you started to operate out of a few locations? You say kind of there was this moment of realization, but what did that moment of realization look like?
yeah. Well, it took a crisis. It took a crisis before I could appreciate the opportunity. So I call it my quarter life crisis because I was 24 years of age. I'd been a graduate for less than 2.5 years. I'd been running this small practice for only 18 months, and we had grown to five practitioners, about $1 million of revenue, which is, in today's standard, that feels still very much a small cottage business. But in our sector at the time, it was nothing to sneeze at. I was on my way, at least to the casual observer. They would have thought he's an honours graduate with staff, making money, and he's really on a trajectory to do well.
Yes,
Me,
I want to jump in there because
yeah,
without kind of stopping you in your flow, because you kind of jumped from naught to $1 million revenue with
yeah,
five people very quickly. And I think
we,
$1 million is an inflection point for a lot of business owners. A lot of people who start out
yeah.
don't ever get to the $1 million. So at what point was kind of the the dream or the aspiration to hire your first practitioner? And the second one, like, was this always the notion, or when did you bring those people into your practice?
It happened so quickly, Brendan. It happened almost despite me. I can't claim genius. Like the demand for, I think, the uniqueness of the service that I had stumbled upon created the momentum, and I had to backfill the opportunity as quickly as I could. And it was hard to staff it because I was such a young, inexperienced therapist. Who wants to work for a guy who really doesn't know his craft? And so we actually went from zero to a million in such a short period of time that I felt overwhelmed by the acceleration. I got seasick from the lurch of this small little business, which still at this point in the story, I didn't want to even participate in. It was a distraction to me wanting to work cross-culturally and be a medical missionary. So, part of my resume at this stage is not only an accidental entrepreneur and a reluctant businessman. I'm now a failed medical missionary because I couldn't get overseas to do what I really wanted to do. But I'm adding staff, one plus one plus one, in that first 24 months, really, just to meet the demand. And I'll tell you, the point of interest isn't my brilliance as a businessman. I think I had offered the market such a value proposition without realizing it. Instinctively or intuitively, I had scratched an itch for the population that they had been asking for, but nobody was delivering. And,
What
and
was it?
this is, well, the key is that physiotherapists have mostly positioned themselves as break fix consultants. We wait for you to get sore or injured. We push on the pain and we mostly treat the symptoms and you get better, but it's a reactive service. And I was frustrated all the way through university and my first job as an employee in the public health system. I felt absolutely discouraged with the sickness model that says we wait for you to fall off the cliff and then we'll repair you to climb it again, only to fall again. So my instinctive service offering was one of saying, hey, let's take a holistic picture of true health. Let's help you live longer and live better. Let me look at posture, nutrition, sleep, movement, exercise. And yes, if you've got an injury, we'll rehabilitate that too. But actually, the goal is live longer, live better. And let's talk about lifestyle. And it caused an avalanche of personal referrals. I had surgeons referring patients to me. Little did they know they were sending them from their exquisite, elegant rooms in a hospital to my carport at home. But it just became a snowballing effect. And so we very quickly got a very large revenue stream coming through, necessitating staff and bigger premises. So I moved out of the carport and into some commercial medical facilities. But at 24 years of age, I was out of my depth and really begrudging the growth, to be fair.
So let's go back to this quarter life crisis. And I'm smiling as you say this because Sean, I mentioned right at the outset, I know Sean very well because I see him once a month on that very basis. For years, I'd been
Yeah.
visiting Sean through kind of martial arts and through triathlon. Once I'd become injured and I went to see Sean, and I decided that actually, at a point when I went to see him, he said, what are we doing today? And I said, you know what,
Yeah.
actually, I'm feeling pretty okay today. Can we just do some work on my back? And then when he'd finished, I said, let's put me in for next month because it seems ridiculous that I'm coming here every time that I'm broken. Let's actually avoid the breakage in the first place. So I'm smiling
Yeah.
as you say, as you
Yeah.
articulate your proposition, which is very, very powerful. Let's go back to the quarter life crisis. I interjected as you were sharing the story.
Yeah.
You were overwhelmed and felt the business now kind of starting to trap you.
Yeah.
The lurch of this growth. We term the architect or the archetype the growth prisoner, the
Yeah.
person
I
who has
saw
built
that.
a business which has actually enslaved them. So
Yeah.
tell me about this.
Yeah, well, you do. You get entrapped. You become a victim of your own success because what starts off, in my case at least, as just a means to an end in buying time before I could get an opportunity as a volunteer on a humanitarian project becomes this all-consuming monster. And now I have staff, I have obligations, I have clients who are depending on a service, I have debts, I have this prison without bars that really it, the walls close in on you very, very quickly. And so at 24, um, aware that actually this was only going to compound over time, this wasn't going to become easier. I did the unthinkable. I crossed the street one night, shaved my head at the neighbour's house, bought a combi van, which is a camper van on wheels. Gave the keys of my practice to a Kiwi who had flown over for a job, sight unseen. Gave him 12 pages of policies and procedures and wished him all the best. And I threw my wife in the boot and we took off around Australia. And it was the genius in the madness was I was running away and I could blame somebody else for what was going to be an inevitable business failure because I was on holidays when this was all going to come crashing down. And I would drive this camper van into the service stations, looking at my wife saying, I wonder if the credit card's going to bounce yet. Can we get another tank of fuel? And the plan was just leapfrog the next tank of fuel until we run out of cash, expecting the whole thing to implode. But Brendan, the practice just kept growing. And the team at home would ring me and say, we need more staff. And 3 months into this escape plan, I'm actually at the top end of Australia. Like I live in Melbourne. So for your listeners who aren't familiar, I'm down under. And I've driven halfway around the country to the most northern part of Australia. And it's really wild, untouched land up there. And we're quite remote. And there is a massive electrical storm brewing on the horizon over Kakadu, which is one of our national parks. And I am just convinced I am not going back to this business. Except I had a big revelation. And the only way I can describe it, not to get religious, but the only way I can articulate such a defining moment is I felt like God said to me, you can either complain about what your life could have and should have been, which was hoping to work cross-culturally in the, developing world. Or you could realize what I have put in your hand, which is a business model that is scalable, that is reproducible, that if you go back to Melbourne and you learn the principles of growth and you apply it to a service industry that nobody's cracked the code on yet, you will generate a commercial revenue stream in perpetuity that will help people far beyond you and your wife could do on your own. And I tell you, that is a compelling revelation. And not to overstate it, but I would say it is the most significant defining moment of this business story because it turned me from wanting to be an escapee from my own narrative to now feeling like I am the biggest advocate. I am a raving fan. I am a madman with an agenda. And I was hook, line, and sinker. I was ready to devote my life to this.
Wow.
And so you talk about when did the lights turn on? It wasn't because I educated myself. It wasn't great mentoring at the time. It wasn't like I was a commercial intellect. I just saw that business can be used for purpose. And what greater vehicle than to use a healthcare initiative to build a war chest to lift people out of poverty. I'm helping my patients who are at the same time, through a noble ethical business model, affording communities they're not even aware of a leg up.
Before we leave to purpose, because I want to get into the how to, we're a similar age, and I know when we went on this journey, scaling wasn't even a thing. It's become very cool now. Everyone's
Yeah.
scaling, but it's what compelled us to actually write the book that codifies the 10 principles to actually scale. And I know we're very aligned on the principles, given our lived experience and certainly interacting with entrepreneurs who have also been there and done this. In the context of purpose, now through your the Iceberg Leadership Institute, how do you support people in tapping into something that's meaningful? For many, I mean, they won't have had this kind of thunderbolt from the heavens that opens up and says, Jason, you must go back.
Yeah.
This is your gift, and you must
Yeah.
scale this business, and which is going to enable you to help so many others. How do you support those entrepreneurs that come to you and say, yeah, Jason, I get that, but where's this
Yeah.
bolt of lightning coming from? Right now, I am that growth prisoner. I'm stuck in this business. What do you say to them? How do you support them in kind of unveiling, finding,
Yeah.
unearthing that purpose?
Yeah, it's an insightful question. I don't think many people have actually nailed the right question like you have. I am actually I'm actually convinced, Brendan, you find what you look for. And so creating the curiosity in my peers, my colleagues, my fellow entrepreneurs out there who are doing it tough right now, and sowing the seed from my own lived experience, and in fact stories of many others now who I've mentored and coached in their own adventures. Whilst I can't predict, and I certainly wouldn't ever want to manipulate or manufacture a moment of this great awakening, I think the more you're hungry for it, the more you do the work, the treasure is found in the cave. So you have to explore. You have to be an archaeologist of your own life and experiences. And as you peel away the layers, I'm mixing all my metaphors here, but as you do the self-discovery, I think actually people do find meaning. They do find purpose. One of my favorite ways of provoking this in the curious is to ask the simplest of all questions. What makes you mad, sad, or glad? Like, watching the news and you start tearing up over something you've seen because it's stirring an emotion or a frustration or a sense of injustice, or seeing an opportunity and it just exciting you and energizing you and turning you from, mediocre into a dangerous and fierce operative. These are the things I want people to take notice of. And we might have different ways of interpreting the experience in terms of the source. Is it God? Is it myself? Is it nature? Look, I'm indifferent maybe to the way people want to tell the story, but the point is they are on discovery mode and they're learning what makes them tick and how they're wired. And I think we are created for purpose. I mean, the way I understand how I've been built is that God created me not by accident, but for purpose. And part of my job is to explore and find and not give up. So for those who are stuck in the weeds with a business that feels like more of a curse than a blessing, my encouragement is do some of that work to self-explore.
So get forensic, be
Yeah.
curious, reframe the current situation as something that you've volunteered for, as opposed to something you're a victim of. And
Oh, I like that.
and it's back to that, is it Joseph Campbell's line about the cave that you're fearful of entering is the place that holds the treasure. So,
Yeah.
back to your analogy, Jason. So that's a very simple but profound question. Okay, moving from purpose. So you've got this compelling reason to go back. There isn't a handbook on scaling a business. at this stage, going back in. So how do you start to begin to scale this business from,
Yeah.
what, 5 or 10 people at this stage? You're now what, 25 years of age,
Yeah.
to having more than 700 practitioners. Let's get into
The
the
mechanics.
mechanics. So where do you start? For someone who says, okay, guys, I'm listening to you. I've probably adapted a little bit of a victim mentality there. Woe is me. I'm in this
Yeah.
situation. I've got customers to serve. I've got bills to pay. I've got staff
Mm,
who I have to manage. But I've been
mm.
adopting a victim mindset. I want now to lean into this idea that the position I'm in is an absolute privilege. I'm
Yeah.
going to kind of lean and get curious about why I'm feeling uncomfortable, and kind of
Yeah.
go into that discomfort.
Mm,
Let's give them some comfort in the how.
yeah. So the first thing to disclose is I didn't come back from that trip around Australia with full clarity of everything I was soon to achieve. It's not like I had the whole blueprint laid out. I didn't have a master plan for 100 locations. Actually, what I came back with is this conviction that business is a tool, it's a vehicle, it's a privilege. And if I harness the upsides of business, I can do a lot of good in the world. And I can remember gathering my very small team when I got back, having begged, borrowed, and stopped just short of stealing to pull together $250,000 to build our first prototype practice under this new model of wanting to be innovative and wanting to do physiotherapy differently. I pulled them all into the room. I gathered them around a whiteboard. This is my big reveal. And I drew 10 little circles on the whiteboard and I said to them, will you join me in this audacious plan of really pouring out our lives for the rest of our career in trying to establish 10 locations around this very limited geography so that we can impact these local communities in a profound way and offer them something that isn't really available. And in the process, I think we'll generate enough margin and enough surplus to not just reward you, but to send this into some of the poorest of the poor communities and close the gap on some of the health outcomes that they should have been experiencing. So to your listeners, I would say scaling is an incremental experience. The biggest dream I could imagine at that point was only 10 locations, and I thought it would take me 40 years to do it.
I love this, and I always say to people, purpose without a vision is huge potential unrealized. Vision without a purpose becomes a distracting illusion. You'd found the purpose, this incredible
Yeah.
energy, and I can feel the energy from the other side of the world. I can only imagine what that felt like when you come back from
Yeah.
from the road trip, coming back into the room and whiteboarding your vision for 10 locations. And
Yeah.
given that I've only recently come to know of you, I suspect everyone in the room was going, "Yes,
Well,
we're
they
we're
didn't.
in."
Well, Brendan, they didn't.
No,
They didn't.
okay. Tell me about
So,
this.
let's be real here. Of the 10 people sitting in the room, I had probably two chomping at the bit saying, yes, yes, we're with you, Jace. And I had maybe six who were kind of like, okay, we'll go for the ride, see how long it lasts, enjoy it for as long as it's rewarding. And I had two absolute naysayers, people who were like, Jace, I don't know what you're smoking. And I think it's good for people to hear this because I didn't need everybody to love it. This was an opportunity to invite people in on an informed basis to now what was a refreshed view of what we're doing. And you're always going to face opposition. You're always going to hit resistance. But you've heard the song "Eye of the Tiger."
Yeah, very much so. Ran to it
Well,
many times.
yeah, you should have introduced me with Eye of the Tiger. That would have been we could have gone along.
We'll
But you
edit
know, I
that
think
in.
uh, Brennan, I think of Eye of the Rhino. It's a totally different song. We have to write our own lyrics. But Eye of the Rhino, just a quick lesson on the rhino. I was in Africa last year. The rhino can only see 2 meters in front.
I didn't know
Now
this.
it's 2 ton of animal. When that rhino, it takes a little while to get going, but once he gets into a full gallop, the momentum, the sheer mass of that animal is like it's hard to pull up short when you've got that much momentum. But he can only see 2 meters at any given point in time. So, a herd of sheep no, a herd of cattle and a flock of sheep. Well, a group of rhinos are called a crash. And that's because when a tree comes into view or a jeep comes into view of a rhino, they've got so much momentum, they can't stop and they rarely are agile enough to go around it. So they just crash through it. And when we think about business and vision, a friend of mine talks about write the vision big enough that you can see it on the run. It needs to be simple.
Love
It
that.
needs to be bold. And you might not be able to see 20 years, 10 years, or even 5 years from now. And even if you think you can, it's an illusion. There's a mirage effect. But you can see 2 meters in front. And that's about all I could see when I came back from Australia. I could just see 10 practices. I thought it was going to take forever. But I ran with all the energy I had. I got the weight of momentum behind me. And when trees would come into view and there were obstacles that I could never have imagined, the beauty is your naivete helps you just crash right through it because you don't know what you don't know, but you are now on a journey. And so I talk about the eye of the rhino as my metaphor for that.
Brilliant. So just recapping the storyline here and the kind of chronology of events. You're 24, 25, you're kind of a couple of years in, you
Yeah.
run away from this business with 5 people, $1 million, starting to feel the weight and the burden of this business, have this profound moment where you feel actually this business that I've been running away from is going to actually enable me to achieve all the things that I really want to do on the humanitarian side of my kind of my reason for being. This is the
Mm,
enabler. This
mm,
and I've been staring at it the whole time. I've had it in my hands the whole time, but I've been running away from it. I come back, I create this vision to 10x kind of the one
yeah.
location to 10 locations. So it's not it's not shy in any way in the context of 10xing. I mean, you're going from 1 to 10, and at, so what do you do now then?
Yeah.
You've created this kind of $250,000 facility. Does this
Yeah.
become the template for you now
Yeah.
to begin to roll out?
Yeah.
Explain,
So
get
so
into the
10 yeah, so 10 practices that should have taken me 40 years through a systematic process of uh, developing a pattern or a replicable model through, I think, 4 key phases ended up enabling me to do 12 in 3 years, which of course was the convincer then that we are onto something bigger than I even imagined. So for those listening, I think that the 4 phases that I would now retrospectively map. So I wasn't smart enough to know it at the time, so I'm not claiming intentionality. But as I look back and I try and reverse engineer what helped me go from 0 to 10 so quickly, I think we had, yes, the clarity of the vision. And if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? So nobody could talk me off the cliff. I had plenty try, but I was now convinced by my own story. But then you have clearly a phase of innovation. So I brainstormed, I whiteboarded, I did all the listing all the ways we could think differently and reimagine physiotherapy. So there is an incubation phase where you have to imagine a different future. So in that innovation, and really it's embracing the tension or the awkwardness of change. Now, when change happens to you, we call it disruption. But when you initiate change, we call it innovation. It's still change, right? So there's the innovation phase. Then there's the prototyping phase. So I prototyped my first practice, that $250,000 investment, and it took me 5 years if you count all the garage or carport years, and then a couple of years in my new flagship prototype to really prove up my model, get it to profitability, work out how the customer needs to be serviced, get the systems right. Then I went into a scaling phase where I did 6 practices, all under management. So it wasn't a franchise really. It was me corporately owning all of the assets, giving minority equity interests to some owner operators or partners in each of the separate locations, and seeing if these systems were transferable,
So
making
let
sure the dilution effect didn't kick in and undo all our value.
so let's just kind of unpack this a little bit before we move ahead, because I think it's really important for the listeners to kind of understand the unit economics here at this point. So
Yeah.
we had with the investment in the $250,000 facility that was going to house all of your innovation, all of your innovative
It's
services.
the seed bed, right? It was the sand pit. It was the testing ground.
Yeah, trying some things
Yeah,
work, some things maybe not working
yeah,
so well.
that's right.
We'll do less of that, more of that. We'll start that, and it takes 5 years to arrive at a model. So, what was that model? How many practitioners? What was the revenue at this stage?
Yeah.
And what was the general kind of the overarching processes that you'd embedded?
Yeah. So we worked out in that proving season that a practice less than $1 million revenue, even though 80% of the profession ran smaller practices, is not viable. It's actually, there's not enough margin to be able to afford the right equipment, the right services, reward the staff, and still have a return on investment. So we proved that, you got to be $1 million plus. You've got to have at least 5 full-time practitioners. We needed a diversity of services to retain the clients. We needed a particular floor plan and layout. We needed a marketing schedule that enabled us to get the real pop on opening so that our fixed costs did not kill us in the journey toward break even. So, we work out all these seemingly obvious things, but to a guy, me, a technician, a physio who really had no instincts for business, these were hard fought lessons in the cut and thrust of everyday business. But you don't want to scale until you've worked all that out. Otherwise, you replicate a flawed model and you double down on your pain. And you end up reproducing a pattern that you're going to have to come back and fix multiples of. So I'm really grateful. Again, I don't want to claim genius. I feel like I'm an accidental success, but we worked out that in that first 5 years, the stuff that we must do, and just as importantly, the things we shouldn't do. I completely overhauled my remuneration model for clinical staff. The whole industry worked with contractors on commission. Well, I did the unthinkable and put them on wages with an upside for performance, but it was a costly risk. But in the end, it engaged a whole different mindset and paradigm for my workforce and opened me up to new opportunities. So we had to play with all that in the innovation phase, right?
This is so
Then we
powerful.
scale. Then we scale that prototype. But the phase I didn't get to is after about 3 years of doing that, it wasn't just up and to the right, continued exponential curve. The last phase of that experience was consolidation. So once we had got to 12 practices, of course, man, I was back to being out of my depth and overwhelmed and needing another trip around Australia and looking to escape because the acceleration tested my systems and most of them broke, right? Because I had imagined 10 locations. So all of the infrastructure, all of the technology I'd invested in, all of the cultural dynamics that I had geared myself up for, kind of, I hoped, worked for 10. Well, I got to 12 so quickly that I realized I had to almost start the cycle again to get from 12 to 50.
So
I had to go
explain,
back to innovation.
yeah, explain this, Jason. So again, you created the template. That template you rolled out across multiple locations, reaching 12 very, very quickly, assuming on the basis of kind of the $1 million per facility.
Yeah.
At this
Yeah.
stage, you're at kind of 12 to $15 million in revenue, a team size of what, like 60,
Oh,
70 staff at this
yeah.
stage, of 5 staff per location. Each location is being headed up by a general manager, and you're sitting on top of all of this as kind of group CEO for Back in Motion. So
Well,
what
well, 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 actually, so I hadn't even got that sophisticated, Brendan. I'm still a treating clinician. I'm still driving between all of the locations like it was madness.
so you're literally still hands on both on
Yeah.
patients and in the
Yeah.
business. Wow.
My wife will tell you those years was just so chaotic because I would go from treating a patient to visiting a practice to solving a problem, an hour's drive from home, coming back late at night, getting up early the next morning and going to a different practice. And it was completely unsustainable.
So
But
what
I
was
didn't have I didn't have the smarts at that point to realize that this had scalability beyond that network size.
brilliant? So
So I didn't want to overcapitalize on management staff.
what was the next inflection point
Yeah.
then? So at this stage, it sounds like kind of one of your limiting beliefs was the fact that I had a vision for 10. We're now at 12. Oh no,
Yeah.
so that sounds like, you had almost in your vision, you had kept yourself, you had kept your own thinking, your own story was this will only work for 10 is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
What were some of the challenges and kind of what was the next inflection point, the next kind of bold kind of reveal that says, I can't do it like this way. You talked
Yeah.
about we had to go back innovating again. So what did that process reveal?
Yeah. So the next cycle of innovation, prototyping, scaling, and consolidation was really the franchising piece. So I realized there is a demand for our service. The brand now has its own momentum. There is interest beyond my immediate geography. And whilst I'm not ready for it, it seems like the world is. And the only way I can keep up with the brand's own story is to now completely rethink my expansion model. So this is where we really embraced franchising as the next engine for growth. Now, there's a lot of different ways to expand. I am not advocating, or I'm not here as the poster child for franchising, but I looked at corporate models, I looked at venture capital, I looked at corporate partnerships, I looked at joint ventures, I looked at licensing, and I had a particular few criteria that were precious to me. Number one, I really wanted to keep sovereignty over the intellectual property because I knew that was my ticket to building the revenue streams to work in the developing world. I also wanted to weight shift some of the reward of ownership or pseudo ownership into the laps of the operators. So for me, franchising became this beautiful synergy. except that nobody had built a franchise in professional services before, let alone healthcare. So
So
I
that
was told it couldn't. I was told it couldn't be done.
that was going to
But
be my next question then,
yeah,
and back to kind of the cycle here of innovation, prototype, scaling, and consolidation. So, uh, did you select one or two potential franchisees as the basis in which you were going to prototype? Now that you had decided that franchise was going to be the new model, tell me more about
yeah,
that.
yeah. So in those first 12, about in those first 12 practices in the former cycle, about half of those practices, I had done these cowboy agreements, these handshake arrangements, pseudo franchising. And for all of $2,000 you could have a piece of your own practice. And so those loyal early adopters, people who had been with me from the beginning for the most part and had been like DIY'd through the system and knew all the skeletons that had been buried, um, who were still, really pushing for this vision. They progressively started to convert into bona fide franchisees, and then their stories became the testimonial that I could use to advocate for others. And even though skepticism was at an all-time high, that a franchise model would never work, I only needed a handful, Brendan, to be the test dummies to come in. And if I gave them a safety net, which I did, and made sure that uh, their success was my absolute objective, then their their great experiences became really my best business card, my best promotional tool. And so it was slow. If I did those first 12 pretty quickly, I think, then it took me maybe another 2 or 3 years to get another 12 because I'd gone into consolidation. I'm now testing the franchising market. It's on the nose, it's controversial. Universities were warning against it. It was poorly understood. I was still learning how to deploy it and making lots of mistakes. And so it was a really tough season, but it's what eventually got me to 50. And once you've got to 50, you're in a whole different season of scaling beyond that.
There's so much in this. Did you recast the vision whenever you decided upon the franchise model? So, was this a case of getting all the folk back in the room again and going, guys, we've cracked it. I want now to take these 12 units to
Yeah.
50 through a franchise model. Did you do that? Did you go back to recast the vision again?
I certainly had to for myself. The team is getting bigger. There's mixed interests. They're not all in it for the same reason I am. So they're not all compelled by the altruistic or humanitarian endeavors that sit behind my story. They're aligned on values, but maybe not on purpose. And so the core group who eventually become part of my national team, I can remember sitting down with them after we had crossed the line and said, we are officially franchising. I commissioned a piece of work by a consultant to do essentially a viability feasibility study and tell me how many of these things do I need to change the world? How much capital do I have to invest to get to, the sweet spot where the royalties in perpetuity start covering my costs and rendering that leveraged return that I can start deploying into the developing world. And the magic number in this feasibility study was about 40 or 45 locations from memory. So that's how I cast the second vision. It's like, guys, we have a tipping point, and if we don't get to 45, all the work and all the effort is vanity. Yes, we're building revenue. Yes, we're building a brand, but we're not delivering on purpose.
So the
And so
purpose is
core
is
group, a core group got behind that one.
I'm There's a couple of things here. Number one, I'm keen to understand how your team were incentivized. Were they part of an equity plan? And secondly, clearly your purpose was informing all the decisions. Are you profitable at this stage at, with the 12 locations, 12 to 15 million dollars, are you doing 10, 15, 20% bottom line with the understanding that you're going to kind of take some of these profits and
Yeah.
and reinvest these into humanitarian causes? So kind of people and
Yeah.
profit.
So for anyone who's watching and not just listening, my profit curve looked like an ECG chart. It was erratic. It was peaks and troughs. And the reason for that is at any individual physical location, the profit was predictable and sustainable, and we had a really good growth model. But for me, who was sitting in the aggregate over these, for every practice that would reach its break even point and now start trading into surplus, I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. I'm now taking that free cash and I'm reinvesting it into new locations and new technologies and staff in management and support services and brand building exercises and legals and chartered accountants who are managing the financials across an ever increasingly complex business. And so, at any one location in isolation, there's good margin. And the individual franchisees are tracking for their own personal returns on a fairly predictable trajectory. But me, I went 2 years without taking a cent out of the business and lived entirely on my wife's nursing salary. We are trying to do this as debt-free as possible because, again, I'm not particularly commercially minded, and I just had this almost irrational aversion to using other people's money to grow because I thought it would restrict my sovereignty to give away my profits when the time came, and I didn't want to be indebted. And so there was this really treacherous roller coaster ride on profit until we got to that tipping point of 45 or 50 practices. And then the whole world changed. I went from black and white to Technicolor, right? The curtains opened and there is a whole new stage to play on because of the magic of scale. And I can still keep opening new locations and reinvesting from free cash, but I've now got leveraged royalties and leveraged aggregate profits coming through and never borrowed a cent from that point onwards.
And at this point now, your revenues and profitability are predictable,
Yeah,
repeatable, sustainable. You've
yeah,
nailed the playbook for each of the
yeah.
locations. You've got very engaged franchisees. It's working for them. It's working for you. So how do you go then from 45 to like 100 and then 100 to 140? What's the next inflection point?
Well, you need another crisis, Brendan. I mean, you make it sound so simple.
No,
You,
I
you,
say
you
to
need
all
it.
of all of the participants in our program, it's typically trauma that triggers change.
Oh, you just need another tragedy in your life. So I would describe the third. I've actually not really thought about this in three phases. It's the way you're asking the question that's causing me to reflect on this. But really, the third iterative season of our growth and scaling was spawned out of a cultural crisis inside our business. So we've got 50 locations. We're doing 25 or 30 million dollars of revenue. We're making money. We're giving it away. We're building hospitals in Burma. We're training allied health staff in India. We're flying people in and out of remote areas of Australia, working with Indigenous Aborigines up there. We're
Incredible.
doing good things.
Incredible.
But what's happened is this entrepreneurial spirit that we were founded on and had grown with started to conservatize. We started to become corporate. I had professionalized my management team, and I can only be in one place at a time. And instead of being out there beating the drum and casting the vision, I'm sitting in meetings and looking at financial statements and trying to sign off marketing campaigns. And I'm losing touch with my people. And general managers and financial controllers are suffocating our creativity. And there's no easy way to say it. And mea culpa, right? Like it's on me. It's my business and I'm the leader. But I woke up one day and people had stopped taking risks. They had stopped innovating. They were in a rut. They were just doing what we had been doing for 5 years and not keeping pace with what our patients wanted. We had disempowered our frontline staff because they needed now bureaucracy to get permission to do anything. And so I took the biggest risk, actually, I think, of my career. And with 50 locations and what most people would think was a pretty sure thing at that point, I blew it all up. I detitled my entire national team, which was about 25 people. So everyone lost their jobs overnight. I pitched them a new vision. This time it's 100 practices, not 50. And I want to get there in 3 years, not 15. So I'm doubling our network in a third of the time that had taken us, or less, a fifth of the time that had taken us to get there. And we were going to do it on a completely different set of cultural imperatives. And I've written a book on this. It's the 3 worst years of my life because I had to completely re-engineer the way decisions were made, the way teams interacted. I had to change the way I led. I had to go back to visioneering and speaking to people about the why, the purpose behind this business. Where we had become corporate, I had to get relational again. And not everybody made it. So some very talented people left the business, but it was right because what that created was fresh oxygen for new people on newly agreed terms with different expectations to take risks again and innovate and try new things and not be afraid to fail and for me to let them have a go. And in 3 years, we not only expanded into every state of Australia, we launched into New Zealand and we put more than 100 practices on the map. But I would never want to do those 3 years again.
So what I'm hearing here, the first 0 to 12 was innovating in the service offering. The 12 to 45 was innovation in the business model.
Yeah, the expansion model,
the expansion model, the franchise model. The 45, 50, let's call 50 to 100 was an innovation in culture.
Yeah.
So in the context of the culture, and I'm conscious because this is leading to a part 2, I have to have you back on. I'm number one. I'm enjoying myself far too much. This is so rich. It's so rich, Jason. It's so powerful. But kind of give me the headlines there in terms of the cultural disruption. Okay, practically you've said overnight you've sent a message out to say, folks, no more titles. We're not chief anything anymore. We're getting back to kind of back to the carport days when we were we were in this for the patient, and we were interacting with the patient every day. We understood the patient's needs. We were listening to them. We were innovating in our services. So forget about all this chief stuff. There's no chiefs around here. We're getting back to what we do best, which is really listening to our customer and innovating. What did that give me the 3 headlines for our listeners, kind of the detitled everyone. What else? What were some of the other disruptions that led to people actually leaving?
So I lit a match and burnt every job description inside the national team. And there were really now only 2 questions I was interested in. What are you really good at? And what do you love doing? And you will no longer be dictated by a static, templated job description as to where you make your best contribution. So here's the vision, 100 practices. What are you really good at and what do you love doing, and get involved? And so it was a meritocracy at this point. If you were prepared to have a go and innovate and put some risk out there, we were prepared to back you and take some losses along the way, knowing that that's how our origin story began. So that would be one headline. The second one was really to accept failure. There's so much been written about this. I think the technical term would be adversarial growth. This idea that you learn more from what you don't succeed at. Edison, found 999 ways not to build the light bulb, right? They're the cliches. But when you suffer a setback, the mentality is to bounce back. That's the language we use. Actually, what we should be striving for is to bounce forward. What did we learn? How do we now think differently? How do we draw value out of learnings from that experience? And so we had to make it safe for people to have a go and fail. And that's painful, particularly when you've got an ambitious agenda for growth, because really it's one outcome. The acronym for that whole season was 7, 50, 100. 7 states and territories. I wanted $50 million coming through the services, and I wanted 100 locations. Obviously, they wouldn't all be mature, profiting locations because many of them would have been a seedbed of new plants. But this was the audacious expectation. And we had to get so much wrong to get it right. So the second headline would be make it safe to fail. And then a third, probably for me personally, and it's transferable maybe to an extent to everybody, you got to lead differently. Just got to lead differently. Like, I thought leadership was this ingrained, inheritable trait. Like, we led with a style that was hard coded, and I'm sure we all have a preference. But having been a student of leadership, I'm a leadership junkie. I've read every book I can get my hands on leadership. And I would say it is as pliable and as adaptable as it needs to be, as situational as the demand put on you. And to learn multiple styles of leadership became really our mantra. Like, a lot of people describe it as change management. I used to say, no, we're just igniting a leadership revolution. And my definition was, in terms of leadership, was set direction, gain commitment, and facilitate change. That's it. Let's just get out and do it. And let's undermanage, overlead and undermanage. And I know this can just sound like semantics, but every day we were tested on this. And we had the big flat screen TVs all around the office with the countdown. You can't ignore the empirical results. So we were up against the clock, and there was just a determination from people that we would not give up. We will die trying.
That's so powerful. The visual, when you say the countdown, was that to reach the 100 locations in the 3-year period that you'd set?
Yeah.
Wow. So powerful. And all of this is simple, but what I say to people in the context of simple just simply means not complex, but it requires effort. And
simple, not easy.
What's remarkable about you and your story is at each point you have this incredible self-awareness to say, no, I need to rip this up and we need to go back to innovate again. I need to rip this up. I'm going back to innovate. And that is so bloody hard whenever we get into a habitual rhythm of just doing things. Some of the things that you share before we move into the close, there's a couple of places I want to go. I want to kind of understand at what point you decided that you were going to sell the business. But before that, you mention, certainly in the talks that I've listened to, things that you should definitely not do. And one of those is outsourcing vision. You
Yeah.
must be the vision caster. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, from lived experience, I violated that principle. So I learnt the hard way. After 10 years of being on my soapbox every day, standing in front of every team meeting in every location and preaching the virtues of our purpose and trying to galvanize the team's effort toward making a difference in the developing world. I concluded, everybody's heard this. I made the decision that it's not new anymore. I'm sick of hearing my own voice. I think they've got it. And of course, the great deception of that is twofold. One, we were growing at such a fast rate that new people were joining our team all the time, and they hadn't heard it. Even if there was a founding group who were now into their 10th or 15th year, and kind of could almost predict my next word, there's this tranche of new people joining all the time for whom that story had not been properly told. And I had neglected to carry it to the depths that I had previously. The second one is to fall for the deception that just because they've heard it means they've understood it. And just because they understand it means that they've signed up or, joined the fight. And if I kind of reminisced on how much reflection I had made in my life on the cause, on the purpose, it was almost a daily refining. It was this thing I would just marinate in. Like it drove me. It was oxygen to my lungs. And yet I'm expecting a new staff to hear it in an induction video and get right to where I am at the same temperature, even though I'd had a decade head start on them. I mean, it was just foolishness as I kind of hear myself even say it to you. So after a couple of years of neglecting the vision casting, where I thought, I'm done, I'm good, tick, I don't have to do that anymore. I noticed this massive drop off in engagement, in that real purposefulness, the reason behind the why. And we lost our way. And it's part of where we landed when we were at about the 50 mark, and I had to re-engineer the cultural dynamic of our team. But one of my big discoveries was coming to the inconvenient truth that I can never afford not to be the visionary. I can't stop telling our story. As monotonous as it feels to me, there are always new audiences, and then the old audiences need to be reminded and refired on it, because this is the spiritual identity of our group.
So
We might have a brand, but the spirit of our group, which really makes us tick, has got to remain central. So nobody could do that other than me. Others can advocate for it and retell it. But I think I carry the conviction, the responsibility of that conviction more than everybody else.
I have a new metaphor for what induction means. We have an induction oven here, an induction hob, and you have to get the right a pan to induct to allow the heat to generate. And what you shared, induction is actually getting people up to the same temperature that I am in the context of my purpose and vision. So it's so powerful.
And if you take the pan off, it cools down. And so you got to put it back on the stove.
So, and that's your job. You can
Yeah.
never outsource putting the pan onto
Yeah.
the stove as the visionary.
Yeah.
So powerful. I'm conscious of your time. How are you for time? Because there's
I'm good. Yeah. Yeah.
brilliant. Okay, Rob, you can edit that little piece out. But this is so rich, so powerful, Jason. in the context of other things, maybe two other things that you should not outsource as a leader, or let's say things that you could, if you could go back and tell your 24-year-old self to do differently, this is what you'd share with them. What are two things you'd share with your 24-year-old self?
I think I would say don't take as many shortcuts as I did with technology. So I had a very minimalist approach in the first instance to technology. I tried to spend the least amount possible to get a minimum outcome, thinking probably technology would move um, too quick for me anyway, and so I took shortcuts. Inevitably, I had to rebuild our tech infrastructure 4 times in 20 years. Now, maybe everybody has had to do that. For me, that was very painful. And I can remember being advised each time, hey, Jace, you know, spend more, do it properly, do it right the first time. And I didn't heed that advice until maybe the third or fourth iteration. So that would definitely be a little coaching moment to my 24-year-old self. Um, I think I'd also, and this is not to undo all the good conversation we've had, Brendan. This is not to undermine the spirit of this theme that we're touching on. But I think I'd actually say to my 24-year-old self, pace yourself. Pace yourself. Scaling is a very worthwhile undertaking. Like I have no regrets. I was built to scale. Like I'm wired that way. I now can appreciate. But I think I would have said to my younger self, pace yourself, because speed is not the same thing as longevity, right? So I think I could have got to my 140 locations before we exited, possibly in the same time frame, but at a different pace. I was frenetic in seasons and it was unhealthy. And I violated just natural principles of sleep and self-care. And that cost me dearly. Um, and probably I'll have consequences of some of that for the rest of my life in terms of sleep patterns and just not having looked after my physical health. And so I think there's an important lesson in that. And I'm careful with the guys I coach and the executive mentoring I do. I'm careful to actually try and guard them around that because we have this sense of urgency that if we don't build it now, it won't be achieved. Whereas I think actually there's a chance I might have been able to get even more scale if I had paced myself differently.
Great advice, and it's something we advocate within our own community of CEOs, leading yourself first and looking after
Yeah.
those core pillars of health. Um, in terms of the exit, then, so we've got to 100, and we're now recasting again to 140. I think you sell at 140. At what point did you decide I'm going to exit this business? I'm going to sell this
Yeah.
business because when I hear you, you have this incredible passion for the business, for the people within the business, for the people that you're serving, for the model that you've created. Like everything, I don't detect any sense other than the kind of the physical toll that it had taken,
Yeah.
that actually you needed to let this business go. So at what point did you decide that you were going to exit the business?
Well, I was on the cusp of our fourth season. So you've really prompted me on these vision casting moments. Well, I set in 2021 or 2020, I I set a new 10-year strategic plan, launched it to the group. It was called Impact 2030. That was the little frame I had given it. And we were going to go from 140 locations to 400 in a decade.
Wow.
I was looking at parallel channels of different allied health services. We were moving very intently into technology-driven platforms. We were looking at home care. We had signed over the years, master licenses into other countries. And so, actually, at this point, I'm still thinking big and bold. And then a pesky little virus turned up on the world stage called COVID. And, Melbourne is reportedly one of the hardest hit in terms of the number of days of lockdown that we experienced. And despite the country going into a standstill, our business grew 25% during COVID. We were still launching new greenfield locations. Our technology was so advanced, we were driving new revenue streams through virtual consultations. Like we were just continuing to grow. So, despite having launched a new decade plan, we ended up with unsolicited offers to acquire the business. And I'd always thought that day might come and was excited for its inevitability because I figured it would release me to do what I always wanted to do. And that was take my money and run and be a medical missionary, go work hands on in the developing world. Like this is still my boyhood dream. This is the why behind the whole thing. So it would almost have been like an unfulfilled part of my story if I'd got to 97 and was still running back in motion and never got to be part of the frontline experience. And so when I started getting this commercial interest in our business, I took it to my advisory board. I took it to our professional advisors. They said, look, with the sorts of numbers they're throwing around, we should actually officially put you on market and see what sort of competitive tension you could benefit from. And the thing just went gangbusters. Like within 6 months, we had 93 offers on the table. I spent all of my lockdown in my pajamas on video conference, entertaining private equity and international vendors who were trying to vertically integrate our business into their hospital networks and their insurance companies and various other undertakings. And so it was quite an elongated journey before we came to the conclusion that we are for sale. We are at the peak of our price market. It probably would take me another decade to get back to this sort of interest or attention, and so it felt like the right off ramp for us.
Huge congratulations. The
Yeah, thank you.
the deal was what, $100 million thereabouts, and
Yeah,
you,
the aggregate price was a little bigger with all the earnouts and trail fees, but there was a lot of people who helped make this thing a success. And if you took any one of our practices, or if you just broke up the group and sold them all off as individual parts, on my valuation, I think it would have been worth well under half. But because in the aggregate there was such a brand force and there was an economy of scale, and in my case, a royalty in perpetuity that did not get disrupted, it attracted multiples that I think far exceeded the pure assets. And we were very well rewarded.
and before we move into the close, did the money bring any surprises, in terms of your mindset, how you live your life? Did it attract unwanted attention? Did it bring kind of any, what were the upsides and kind of downsides of
Yeah,
receiving a check that size?
it's another insightful question, Brendan. Take somebody to have lived this journey, which I'm sure you have, to appreciate there is a burden that comes with wealth. And I don't mean this glibly, but my wife would say the responsibility we felt after the sale, knowing that you only get to sell your business once, and the capital has been entrusted to us as caretakers, as stewards of the purpose for which we feel so compelled around. It's not for self-consumption. It's actually to make a difference in the world. This was the promise we made to our people. So to all of a sudden become, to become greedy or selfish with that would have been a horrible stain on our story, really. And so I think, yes, I'd get an email every week or so often looking for investment in businesses from people who think that I have capital to spend. For the most part, Paulina and I put it into a charitable trust. We have the absolute privilege, and it moves me deeply, that we get to invest into humanitarian projects and church building strategies and helping feed orphans and rescue kids from being trafficked all over the world through 30 or more projects at any given point in time. Becomes close to a full-time job deploying capital for these sorts of initiatives, because there's a lot of strategy, and you want to have impact. You don't want to be irresponsible with the way we deploy the capital. We live in the same house. I drive the same car. Um, Honestly, I don't think anybody in my street would know any different, because our lifestyle looks, for the most part, the same. And unless you read the book, you wouldn't know.
Well, that's a really beautiful place to close, because I'm going to appeal to all of our listeners to really go deep on your story, to go and grab one of your books, because it will lead on to wanting to know more about you. You share so much wisdom online. You've shared so much wisdom and so much value today. Can I press you, as we move into the close, Jason, for 3 timeless takeaways?
3 timeless takeaways. Only 3. Um, I think we've touched on this, I think, almost from the get-go, but I hope your listeners have heard that for me, conviction actually is more important than vision. So I've given you some moments of vision casting, but I hope they hear conviction outstrips vision every day of the week, because vision is a picture of the future that could be. Conviction's what must be. I'm compelled with conviction. I don't even have to like the idea, but if I have a conviction, I'm going to follow through. I think a second takeaway would be, and we didn't really touch on this, but I've shared in other forums some of my journey on this, but really coming to terms with the truth that people are more important than profits. Sometimes when we get our commercial hat on and we go for scale and the reality bites, I can get very tactical and very determined. And my wife has been my greatest coach to remind me, not just in the purpose behind the business, but to remind me that the people in the business are as much loved and need to be appreciated, and therefore relationship trumps profit. So if I make a little less, but I get to enjoy and acknowledge and appreciate the people we do the work with, then I'm enriching actually the whole community around me. And I haven't been as good at that as I wished I had. So I'm a work in progress, but I come back to that a lot. I do a lot of reflection on that. And then thirdly, I would just say that we think we're scaling, or we think we're building a business. My experience is the business built me. The business is building you. We think we're building a franchise. The franchise is building you. We are becoming somebody with every experience, every lesson, every mistake, every victory. We are becoming somebody. And so that's why I love the commercial world, not because of the money and because of the strategy and the negotiation, all of which is a fun sport. But actually, I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for the business who taught me to be this way. So the business is a great teacher.
They are so, so powerful. I'm going to indulge myself because I always like to understand the habits, the non-negotiables that actually undergird those who have achieved the success that you've achieved, Jason. You, what are one or two things that actually, from a daily perspective, that are
Yeah.
non-negotiable for you?
Well, I write down everything I do in a calendar, in a schedule. Like every hour of my day is programmed either proactively or retrospectively so that I can account for my time. I think my most precious resource is time, and it's the one I can't redeem. So I will use it as intentionally as possible. So if you saw my calendar, it's often in 15-minute increments, and I will break down everything from time alone to time with family to meetings to exercise. I mean, it's just totally programmed and calculated. So that's a diagnosable illness. I realize that. Like that's a pathology, but it's a habit. I take it that seriously.
Well, I'm aligned with that, and we had a fellow countryman, Clint Ray, on the show recently, who is a PT to the military, and
Yep.
has recently written a book called The Cognitive Athlete. And he termed the calendar, because very aligned. Everything's on the calendar. In fact, I use Jesse Itzler's big ass calendar that's in my gym, so I can see it every morning. And
Yep.
but he terms the calendar as a performance tool. I'd never heard it
Yeah.
framed like that, but so
Yeah.
that's very consistent with what you're
Can I
saying as
use
well.
that? Can I use that?
Absolutely.
Can I tell my kids it's me being athletic?
You're a cognitive athlete. Or you look like you're a physical athlete as well, but you're a cognitive athlete and you're using these wonderful
Um,
performance tools. The
Flattery
second
will
one.
get you everywhere. A second habit that I take really seriously is I will carve out the first hour of my day. Not always, but it is really a routine for me for prayer, for reading the Bible, for journaling. So I do a lot of writing and reflective work because it is just so important to me to stay connected to my divine creator. I don't think of my life as my own. I actually think it's a gift. It's a privilege. I've got to look after my life, and I feel like the only way to know what should be important to me today is to tap into the one who I think built me, who made me, and who gave me purpose. So I will make my spiritual disciplines a non-negotiable.
Well, you're a wonderful writer, and I appeal to all of our listeners to go and grab a copy of at least one of your books.
Thank you.
So on the subject of writing, what's next for you? Is there another book in the offing? You mean you're a man that's literally just at midlife. You're ready for another 5 decades here.
I'm ready for another crisis.
Absolutely.
Um, there's a fourth book that I have drafted an outline for, and I'm trying to decide, Brendan, whether I have the get up and go to really push into that. I think I might, but maybe not this year. It takes a lot out of you actually to author a book of substance, and so yeah, I'm toying around with the idea.
Good man. Well,
Yeah,
look,
thank you.
Jason, I want to thank you for today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I've had more than 200 guests in this podcast for the last 5 years, and this has
It's a great
been,
achievement.
well, thank you. You're a truly remarkable and inspiring individual, and I say that with all sincerity. You're someone who I certainly want to stay in touch with. You've inspired me today just with the way you conduct yourself, with your purpose, with your service to others, whether you believe in God, source, the universe, whatever. You're just a good human. And I wish you every success with everything that you're doing. For anyone who wants to connect with you and find out a little bit more about you, Jason, where should we send them?
The easiest place would be jasontsmith.com.au, and all roads, all tentacles for whatever you might be looking for can be explored off that. So Jason with a T, Smith.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put a link to that website on the show notes. Jason, thanks again.
You're a
Take care.
generous host. Thanks you, Brendan.